Elden Ring is FromSoftware's biggest release yet, boasting incredibly high reviews and selling millions on top of millions of copies worldwide. Originally teased back in 2019, the game created incredible amounts of hype and anticipation around its release. And when the game did release, it was abundant that difficult games could be some of the best out there. But this wasn't the first line of games that FromSoftware made that ended up turning heads towards their studio, as the series before it was the one to pave the way for Elden Ring. Dark Souls faced a lot of backlash, criticism, and hate over the course of its three-part series, mostly due to difficulty. FromSoftware's philosophy of not including difficulty options in their games is a more unconventional one, as most games will opt for a simple system of making the game harder by just buffing the enemy's health and damage. Now, the reason why I'm using FromSoftware as the primary example for all of this is because they were and still are the most successful game studio to reject these simple ideas and focus on something completely different. FromSoftware's philosophy of difficulty isn't based on making the game harder per se, but to allow the player to get better, and over time be able to take on the challenges ahead of them. And one thing that people confuse with Dark Souls the most is that the difficulty isn't accessible or fun. Sure, after a while you might get annoyed at the game because you died 100 times. Either way, the thought of difficulty in these games being inaccessible is not a conclusive one, as making games more accessible doesn't mean dumbing them down. It's making them more approachable and enjoyable for players. There is no right way to play a game, but regardless, difficulty isn't bad. In fact, it's one of the most captivating things about a game. I cannot count how many times I've been compelled to come back to a game, no matter how many times I've lost or died in it. And that's mostly because us humans are very competitive, even if we play these games alone most of the time. But Dark Souls isn't the only example of this, because other games have faced the exact same criticism. The most misunderstood thing about difficulty is that it's not about giving you a harder time. Rather, it's giving you the capability to improve beyond your level. And with Elden Ring being FromSoftware's most accessible game, you don't need to force yourself to fight bosses that are out of your skill level. You can go level up on a whole different region of the map before even making it to the first major boss. And when you're ready, you can go fight the necessary bosses to progress. Personal expectations also matter, because if you go into a game like Elden Ring or Dark Souls, thinking that you will end up throwing your controller out of the window, then obviously you won't enjoy the game nearly as much as if you went into it with a neutral point of view. But difficulty isn't just defined by one game. While FromSoftware has very clearly rejected the notion of difficulty options, some games need them. Most games aren't Souls-likes or fast-paced action RPGs, but more cinematic and relaxed games, made to immerse you in their world, and primarily, their purpose is to tell a story. And when you're too busy thinking about how to beat one boss, it's really easy to gloss over what's actually going on. Difficulty is purely subjective, so coming after developers for making games that don't follow the trend is idiotic. Not every game is made for you. Fiction can be consumed and enjoyed in different ways. It is not all sunshine and rainbows. And in the gaming industry, we need developers that go against the trend. But on the other end, games that have difficulty settings aren't bad by any means. And some have even better difficulty than FromSoftware's games. FromSoftware's way of looking at difficulty doesn't always apply to different games. And yes, sometimes by buffing the enemies, you can create a more challenging but fair experience. And one game like this is Doom Eternal is almost 4 years old at this point, but it still remains in my eyes the best shooter I've ever played. With incredible world building, hidden lore, some of the best combat you will ever experience, and one of the best video game soundtracks to ever come out. It left its mark on me. But Even after several playthroughs, I was always tempted for more challenge. And with Doom Eternal, it's easy to find that, as you have a plethora of difficulty options to choose from, going all the way up to the hardest difficulty, Ultra Nightmare. The fastest, most brutal form of this game, giving you a single life to play with. And if you die, even at the final boss, you have to start all over again. The tougher difficulty options in this game force you to learn the gameplay loop and master it, because if you haven't learned how to quickly switch between nearly a dozen guns that are in your arsenal at wildly fast speeds, you will die. I have been trying to complete this mode for years, but have never gotten anywhere close to the end. And after playing the game through with almost all difficulties, I'm still compelled to beat the game at the last one. But there is also a game that has made me die more than Dark Souls, Sekiro, or Elden Ring combined. Spelunky. I have hundreds of hours in Spelunky. It's a game that's very simple on the surface. Your goal is to make it as deep as you can into the caves. And with each cave comes different enemies, NPCs, and damsels that you have to save in exchange for more health. The deeper you go, the harder it gets, as you will encounter more enemies in different cave biomes. This game is incredibly hard, not because of the surface level gameplay, but because this game doesn't care about your mistakes. I have died hundreds of times in this game, and I'm not even counting the other playthroughs I have had beforehand on other computers. Like Dark Souls, Spelunky doesn't have difficulty settings. The only things you can really customize is the look of the game. After over 2 years of trying, I still haven't beaten this game. Mostly because I'm cocky as hell when it comes to this game, but also because it is really easy to trap yourself and die due to your mistakes. Spelunky, like Dark Souls, has a difficulty system that gets harder as you go deeper into the game. This makes sense, but one thing this game does differently is the fact that there is no level up system. So, you have to purely rely on your skill to beat the game. There are a lot of different difficulty systems, and, to be honest, none of them are bad. But the problem doesn't lie within the systems. It relies on how developers use them. Difficulty is incredibly subjective to the game and to the individual playing it. While some consider Dark Souls' bosses easy after 4 playthroughs, there are always the beginners that die dozens of times to them. And not all games are meant to be unforgiving. Some are there to tell a story. Some are there to let you build the world around you with your creativity. There will never be a right way to play a game, and there will never be a perfect difficulty mode that applies to all games. It is all subjective. Thanks for watching.